Welcome back, everyone, to Sip and Talk. I'm your host, Joe, and this is Sunny next to me.
Hey!
We often forget to introduce ourselves, but we remembered today. You guys are probably used to it by now.
Maybe.
And really looking forward to our chat today. We're diving into something that kind of sits right at the crossroads of, well, everything economics, culture, and some pretty deep geopolitics.
And I'm here ready to try and pull those threads apart. It's definitely a fascinating topic, but yeah, a tense one too.
You know, I was just thinking about Japan recently. It sort of feels like they've started playing this game, I guess you could call it Japan first, where like every time the immigration numbers tick up, especially Chinese immigration, the political mood seems to just shift further and further right. It's quite a connection, isn't it?
It really is. And being direct about it is, I think, necessary here. That connection you're pointing out, that's the real heart of what we're exploring today on Sip and Talk.
Right.
We're seeing this very clear, very rapid wave of Chinese immigration, and it's happening at exactly the same time as this big ongoing shift towards right-wing politics in Japan. Politics that are often, openly anti-immigrant. It's probably not a coincidence. More like a cause and effect thing that's become really visible.
Okay, so that's our mission then, to figure out exactly how this specific demographic shift is acting as the spark, maybe the fuel, and definitely the amplifier for right-wing political moves in Japan. Because you're right, it's not just about like a few more people on the subway or needing apartments. It feels like it's tapping into something deeper about how they see themselves as a country.
Absolutely. But hold on, before we get really granular, zoom in on Tokyo and those commuter towns, we got to pull back first.
Okay.
We need to remember Japan isn't just, floating in space. To really get why suspicion is focused so sharply on Chinese individuals, we first need to understand the huge regional picture, China's influence across all of Asia.
Ah, right. The context.
Yeah. Japan's domestic situation, it's really just one piece, albeit a very high-pressure piece, within this much, much bigger geopolitical game board.
That makes total sense. We can't just talk about the symptoms in Japan without understanding the regional sort of, the anxiety that sets the stage.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack that big picture. Why does China cause so much tension all around?
Well, if you look at China's relationship with, honestly, almost every single country on its borders, it's defined by this really deep, almost contradictory feeling.
How so?
China is, at the same time, the biggest economic engine in the region, the place everyone wants to trade with, get investment from, and also the single biggest long-term security worry.
A real double-edged sword, then.
It really is. And every capital city in Asia is basically trying to figure out how to grab the economic opportunities without, getting cut by the security risks.
Okay, let's start with the economic side, the opportunity blade, I guess. How powerful is that pull? How attractive is the Chinese market?
Oh, it's massive, globally significant. China's the #1 trading partner for pretty much all its neighbors. They offer huge markets for goods, they invest capital, and they build critical infrastructure. We see this really clearly with the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI.
Ah, yes, the BRI, the new Silk Road, right?
Yeah.
Building infrastructure everywhere.
Exactly. It's building ports, railways, vital links, like the China-Laos Railway, which is a game changer for a landlocked country like Laos.
Right.
For economies in Southeast Asia especially, this money provides connectivity and infrastructure they desperately needed and, frankly, probably couldn't have afforded on their own for decades. It's a genuine economic boost. And, historically, China's stability has helped the region too. Think back to the 1997 Asian financial crisis.
Okay, yeah.
While other currencies were crashing, China kept the renminbi stable. That acted like an anchor, honestly, preventing things from getting even worse across the region. So there's a track record of positive economic influence sometimes.
That's the shiny side of the coin.
Yeah.
But we all know those benefits often come with strings attached, sometimes really heavy strings. Where does the risk part start to build?
The pressure starts exactly when those economic benefits begin to feel like economic vulnerabilities or even strategic ones. The phrase we hear all the time is debt trap diplomacy.
Right.
The core fear is that these massive BRI loans, which might look good up front, just become impossible for smaller or developing nations to repay.
Can you give us a real-world example? Because debt trap sounds a bit abstract, but I imagine it feels very real if you're caught in it. What does losing sovereignty actually look like?
Yeah, look no further than Sri Lanka and the Hambantota port. Sri Lanka just couldn't repay the huge loans used to build it.
How?
So they were essentially forced to hand over control of the port plus about 15,000 acres of land around it to a Chinese state-owned company. on a 99-year lease.
99 years, wow.
That's not just a business deal. That's basically transferring strategic control over a vital piece of your country for almost a century. That one example. It sends chills down the spine of every other small nation thinking about taking on big BRI projects.
Yeah, I can absolutely see why. That really clarifies the tension. And beyond the debt trap risk, there's also the more immediate, competitive threat to local businesses, right? That's a different kind of economic pressure.
That's the China shock, and it's everywhere. China is the world's factory, right? So when their own domestic demand slows down, or they just have too much industrial capacity, think solar panels, steel, basic electronics.
They dump it elsewhere.
They export that surplus capacity at rock-bottom prices. This floods markets in places like Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia. It makes it impossible for their own local, often newer, industries to compete.
So local factories close down.
Local workers get laid off, yeah. And some analysts worry this is causing a kind of permanent hollowing out of Southeast Asia's own manufacturing potential. It keeps them stuck just exporting resources instead of becoming industrial powers themselves.
Wow. Okay, so the economic dominance creates both this existential debt risk and this crushing competitive pressure. But then you add the straightforward geopolitical friction, the military buildup. That's where the real fear of state power comes in, I guess.
That's the ultimate security driver, absolutely. China's rapid military modernization, plus their, let's say, assertive actions in disputed territories, that's the main source of instability in the region.
Like the South China Sea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Building those artificial islands, putting military bases on them, that constantly raises the risk of conflict with countries like the Philippines or Vietnam.
And for Japan specifically, the flashpoint is the Senkaku-Ryō Islands dispute.
Precisely. The Japanese public sees Chinese ships constantly entering what Japan considers its territorial waters or exclusive economic zone. It feels like a direct challenge to the status quo. And then you have the ongoing tensions on the China-India border. Remember that clash in the Galwan Valley in 2020?
Yeah, that was serious.
It serves as a constant reminder that large-scale conflict isn't just history, it's a live possibility.
Okay, so let me try to put myself in Tokyo. My government needs Chinese trade to keep the economy afloat.
Yep.
But at the same time, I'm watching China militarize disputed islands right near me, and I'm seeing other countries basically lose control of strategic assets like ports because of Chinese debt. This big background fear, this deep suspicion of the Chinese state, its power, its assertiveness, that's the baseline feeling.
That's exactly it. That fear, that sort of pre-existing anxiety, gets immediately projected onto any Chinese national who moves to Japan, even if they're just, a student or a chef or an engineer looking for a better opportunity.
The local tension is already loaded with this national security baggage.
Correct. That context is just crucial because now we can shift from those big regional dynamic right into the shock happening inside Japan. Let's talk scale, because the numbers are just wild for a country that historically was famously resistant to immigration.
Right. They went from basically closed to suddenly quite open, it seems.
The speed of growth is really unprecedented for Japan. They relaxed visa policies mainly because they absolutely had to. They have huge labor shortages because of their aging, shrinking population.
So they needed workers.
Desperately. And the requirements became pretty simple. Basic skills, pass a simple Japanese test, and you could come in. So as of late 2024, the number of Chinese residents in Japan hit 873,286.
Wow, nearly 900,000 out of how many foreign residents total?
About 3.77 million. So Chinese residents make up almost a quarter of the entire foreign population. And that growth happened relatively quickly.
It's still growing.
Oh, yeah. Based on the current trends, projections show that number will easily top 1 million by 2026. And this isn't just one type of immigrant. It's students, highly skilled professionals, and also, significantly, investment immigrants bringing in quite a bit of capital.
Okay, nearly 1 million people.
Yeah.
But I think what makes this such a political issue isn't just the total number, right? It's the concentration. They're not spread out evenly. They're forming these very distinct, very visible communities. And that can feel like a major cultural shift to the locals.
That's exactly where the friction on the ground really starts. Tokyo is ground zero. The main 23 wards of Tokyo hold almost 300,000 Chinese residents.
A huge concentration.
And you go to specific areas like Ikebukuro and Toshima Ward.
Yeah.
The whole atmosphere has changed fundamentally. You see signs everywhere, but not primarily in Japanese. They're in simplified Mandarin, advertising things like malatang, regional Chinese dumplings, shanxi noodles.
So it feels like a Chinatown.
It creates a vibrant scene, definitely. But it's a scene where suddenly the main language you see and hear for business isn't Japanese anymore.
That must change the whole feeling of your own neighborhood.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the concentration can get even more extreme, right? Leading to those parallel societies people talk about.
Yes. The textbook example is the Kawaguchi Shibazono Donchi. It's a massive public housing complex in Saitama, just a short train ride from Tokyo.
Okay.
Huge place, about 2,450 households in total. Local estimates suggest that now at least 2,000 of those households are Chinese residents.
2,000 out of roughly 2,500. That's about 80%.
Exactly. The concentration is so intense that they've essentially formed a completely self-sufficient bubble, economic and social.
What does that mean day to day?
Think about it. All your socializing, all your shopping, banking, finding a job, it can all be done entirely through Chinese apps like WeChat, within Chinese language groups and networks. There's almost zero practical daily need to interact with or integrate into the wider Japanese society, linguistically or otherwise.
And that's where the shock hits the local Japanese community really hard, not just in Tokyo itself, but in these surrounding areas. Can we talk about that housing crisis anecdote? Because that really drives home the speed and maybe the perceived ruthlessness of the economic impact.
Yeah, it's something pretty much unheard of in Japan's rental market, which is usually very stable, very slow-moving. A construction expert pointed out this trend. Chinese investors buying up entire apartment buildings, not just one unit, the whole building.
Okay.
And then immediately sending notices to all the existing tenants, often long-term Japanese residents, raising the rent threefold.
Triple the rent overnight. That sounds jarring for Japan.
It's a complete shock to the system. Japanese rental agreements are typically built on trust, stability, slow adjustments, this kind of sudden, aggressive use of capital to force people out. It just wasn't done.
And it forces people out.
Immediately. Especially long-term Japanese residents, maybe retirees or families who've been there for years. They're forced out of their homes, their neighborhoods overnight. It completely changes the social makeup of the area. And we're not always talking luxury apartments. Often it's just regular, modest housing. It causes huge anxiety.
I can only imagine the feeling. Live somewhere 20 years, suddenly a new foreign owner triples the rent. You'd feel totally powerless, displaced in your own country.
Precisely. And the friction isn't just about money and housing. It spills over into this deeply ingrained cultural idea of public responsibility.
Okay, explain that concept. It sounds important in Japan.
Japan runs on a high degree of sort of collective thinking and unwritten social rules. You know, the concepts of hun your private feelings and tape me, the public face you show.
Right.
When you live somewhere or run a shop, there's an unspoken agreement, this public responsibility. You're expected to pitch in with community cleaning days, pay small community fees to maintain shared areas, basically keep things harmonious on the block.
And the issue is that new residents aren't doing that.
Well, many new Chinese-owned businesses, even if they're successful commercially, face criticism for just not participating in these local norms. They might refuse to pay the community fees or skip the cleaning activities.
How is that perceived by the Japanese neighbors?
To them, it's not just skipping a chore. It feels like a rejection of the basic social contract of living there. It looks like prioritizing individual profit over the well-being of the community.
That sense of separation, whether it's intentional or not, feeds into that parallel society idea.
Yeah.
And you mentioned even service industries reacting. Like barbershops.
Yeah, that was a stark example. Some barbershops actually started putting up signs saying they couldn't serve non-Japanese speakers.
Wow.
Now, that sounds harsh, but it wasn't necessarily just prejudice. It was often a practical reaction. The communication barrier was just too high to figure out what kind of haircut someone wanted, but it reflects the broader issue. Many immigrants feel little need or pressure to learn Japanese because, as we saw with Shibuto no Danshi, they can manage their whole lives within their own language bubble.
And this leads to what you call the stigma dilemma, where small incidents get blown up to represent the entire group.
Yes, that's a really important point. Think about the experience of someone like the owner of that Jianbing Guzi shop, the Chinese crepe place.
Okay.
He mentioned feeling like even though he and his family were trying hard to fit in, Chinese residents are just watched constantly, judged much more harshly than Japanese people.
For the same things.
Exactly. He pointed out, look, Japanese people sometimes litter, drop cigarette butts, maybe even urinate in public if they're drunk, it happens. But if a Chinese person does the exact same minor thing, it gets seized upon by media, by online chatter, and used to paint the entire community with the same brush. See? They don't respect our rules.
That's a really powerful illustration of how that background geopolitical fear instantly turns everyday social friction, a noisy neighbor, maybe messy trash disposal, into this big national cultural judgment. the fear of the state gets mapped onto the individual.
Precisely. And that is the pathway. That's how we get from local annoyances, high rent, maybe different community habits, to a full-blown national security alarm that actively fuels the political right wing.
Okay, let's make that leap now. Because it's one thing to grumble about rent, but it's quite another to see that local friction turn into national security warnings that actually swing elections.
Absolutely. The frustration, the anxiety, it's been effectively weaponized by certain political groups. We saw this clearly in the 2025 upper house elections. Japanese priority became a major slogan, a rallying cry.
And who were they prioritizing against?
Certain parties explicitly framed the Chinese immigrant population as the main threat. The threat to Japan's cultural identity, its economic stability, even its safety.
And this wasn't just some fringe talking point. It actually worked.
It worked dramatically well. The right-wing Senseido Party, for example, leaned heavily into this anti-immigrant nationalist sentiment. Their whole platform was about controlling immigration, protecting Japanese culture.
And the result?
They won 15 seats in that election, a significant jump. It showed that this anti-immigrant message is now a potent force, capable of really moving votes in Japanese politics.
But the fear isn't just cultural, right? It connects back to those harder security concerns we talked about earlier. That's where this private police thing comes in.
That's the part that really alarms the security folks. A former vice minister of foreign affairs specifically warned about unusual organizing happening within Chinese communities. Specifically, groups setting up offices that were referred to as private police stations.
Private police? In Japan? Run by whom? That sounds strange.
That sounds very strange, but it connects directly to that issue that got global attention, the so-called overseas police service stations.
Right. Those stations allegedly used by Beijing to monitor their citizens abroad.
Exactly. The allegation from various international reports and governments is that these stations are used by the Chinese state to keep tabs on, harass, or even coerce dissidents or others who have left China. So for the Japanese government, seeing something similar pop up locally isn't just weird organizing. It looks like a potential real violation of their national sovereignty.
Like foreign state power operating illegally inside Japan, maybe using community centers or something as a cover.
That's the fear. And this leads us to the absolute crux of the issue, the thing that gives the political rights argument a kind of legal strategic weight. What specific law makes every Chinese immigrant a potential security risk, regardless of their personal feelings or actions?
Okay, this seems critical.
It's the crucial vulnerability Japan faces, and it's written right into Chinese law. Specifically, the national intelligence law. And there are others, too, like the anti-espionage law that reinforce it.
And what does national intelligence law actually say? How is it different?
Well, unlike in most Western countries where intelligence agencies usually rely on people cooperating voluntarily, China's law is explicit and it's mandatory. Article 7 is key here. It basically states that all Chinese citizens and organizations must support, assist, and cooperate with state intelligence work when required.
When required. That sounds pretty broad.
It's incredibly broad, and the key is must. It removes any ambiguity, any personal choice, or conflict of loyalty. It's a legal obligation.
So it's not about judging someone's character, whether they like Japan, whether they want to integrate. It's about this legal duty they have to a foreign government, one that Japan might see as an adversary.
Exactly. So even if a Chinese resident in that Shibuzono Donchi complex is perfectly assimilated, speaks fluent Japanese, loves the local culture, works hard, Japan's security establishment worries that in a crisis, especially something involving Taiwan or the Senkaku Islands, then that citizen could be legally compelled by Beijing, maybe under threat of harm to their family back in China, to act as an informant or provide logistical help or do something else that undermines Japan's security interests. They automatically become what you might call a dual-use asset.
Wow. That puts Japan in an incredibly tough spot, a real dilemma. They desperately need the labor they need, that million-plus workers to prop up their economy and care for their aging population.
Right. Economic necessity.
But at the same time, they deeply fear that the largest group providing that labor could be legally turned against them in a security crisis. It's like a strategic bind with no easy way out.
It absolutely is. And it's this politicalization of immigration, fueled by the laws of the home country, that makes Japan's situation feel particularly sharp right now, perhaps more so than with previous waves of immigrants from, say, Korea or Brazil.
That's a great point. And it's interesting because other neighbors of China are also dealing with large Chinese populations and similar pressures. Let's look at South Korea for a minute. They have a huge Chinese population too, right? How does the anti-China feeling play out there? Is it different?
Korea is a fantastic comparison because it highlights a key difference. It shows that while, yes, there's social friction from immigration, that friction usually isn't the main driver of anti-China sentiment there.
So what is the main driver in Korea?
In Korea, the core resentment seems to stem much more directly from big political and security actions taken by the Chinese state. The immigrant population then becomes sort of a convenient, visible target for that state-level anger.
You mean like state coercion that really hits home? Like the backlash after Korea deployed the Thaeped missile defense system in 2016?
Precisely. South Korea installed Thaeped, which Beijing saw as a threat. China's response was swift and brutal. They unleashed what everyone called economic weapons.
Like boycotts.
Massive boycotts. An almost complete ban on many Korean cultural exports. K-pop, K-drama, the whole Hallyu wave was targeted.
What was the impact?
It was devastating. Tourism from China just dried up overnight. Chinese tour groups vanished. Korean brands, cosmetics companies, entertainment giants, even big retailers like Lotte faced huge losses. Regulatory hurdles in China. We're talking billions of dollars lost.
Ouch.
So Koreans saw this very clearly as China punishing them economically for making a national security decision Beijing didn't like. The anger was aimed squarely at the Chinese government.
So the anger starts with Beijing's actions because of the real economic pain and political pressure they felt.
Yeah.
And then the immigrants already living in Korea become sort of stand-ins for that anger.
That seems to be the pattern. Immigration acts more like a catalyst or a focal point, not the root cause. South Korea has a very large Chinese population. It's something like 43% of all foreign residents.
That's huge.
Yeah. And the social friction is definitely... There are worries about jobs, competition, high concentrations of Chinese residents in areas like Dareng-dong and Seoul. This gives the political anger a visible target. You hear narratives like, China is taking our jobs. But the underlying fury, it seems fundamentally driven by Beijing's actions on the world stage.
That's fascinating. So unlike in Japan, where the political right seems to be shouting infiltration because of the sheer number of immigrants and that intelligence law.
Right.
In Korea, the government is actually trying to cool down the anti-China rhetoric. Why the different government response?
It really seems to boil down to government pragmatism, mainly driven by economics. Even though polls show high anti-China sentiment among the Korean public, the government actively tries to de-escalate. The former president, Lee Jae-myung, for instance, publicly spoke out against racial discriminatory assemblies, saying they actually damage the national interest.
So they're putting business first, even if it's not popular with everyone at home.
It looks that way. The trade relationship with China is just too massive, too vital to jeopardize. They need that economic connection. They're actively doing things like offering visa waivers for Chinese tour groups, setting targets to attract millions of Chinese tourists to boost the economy.
Interesting.
The priority seems to be practical diplomacy, maintaining stability, keeping the trade flowing, even if public opinion is quite negative towards China.
Okay, that really highlights the difference clearly. In Japan, the core fear seems to be about potential political or security infiltration made possible by the immigrants' legal ties back to China.
Yes, enabled by that national intelligence law.
Whereas in Korea, the immigrant population is more of a visible social lightning rod for anger that's primarily caused by China's external actions, its state coercion against Korea itself.
Exactly. And that fundamental difference in the perceived threat really shapes the political reaction in each country. Which brings us right back to Japan's very difficult current situation.
Right. Let's try to sum up where Japan finds itself right now.
Okay, well, they're truly stuck between a rock and a hard place, as the saying goes. On one hand, they have this existential economic need. They need those million-plus workers to fill jobs, support their social security system, basically keep the economy from shrinking further.
That's the rock.
That's the rock. Oh. And the hard place is the simultaneous challenge to their national security and sovereignty, because the legal system of the immigrants' home country explicitly requires them to cooperate with its intelligence services if asked.
It feels like there's no easy way out. Either they embrace a kind of nationalism that could cripple their economy, or they ignore the security risks, which feels naive given the regional tensions.
It's a profound dilemma, but some experts, like Professor Tomoko Ako at the University of Tokyo, suggest the path forward requires Japan to really lean into its strengths as a democracy. The answer isn't to give in to fear and prejudice.
What's the alternative?
It involves making a very clear strategic distinction. Differentiate between the Chinese Communist Party, which is the source of the security concern, and the Chinese people living in Japan, who are the needed workforce and, just individuals.
So engage with the community. Don't isolate them. Try to build bridges.
Exactly. The advice is to actively work with the Chinese residents who are open to cooperation, share democratic values, and want to integrate. There's a belief, perhaps a hope, that by influencing and integrating this large community within Japan,
You create a different dynamic.
you could foster a population that respects rule of law, democratic norms, and that maybe, just maybe, could eventually have a positive influence back towards China itself. It's about building resilience through shared values, not building walls out of fear.
That definitely sounds like a more constructive, though challenging path than just leaning into the right-wing reaction.
Yeah.
But it leaves us, and you, our listener, with this really big global question to think about, doesn't it?
What's that?
If economies around the world increasingly need immigrant labor to survive, like Japan does, like many Western countries do,
Yeah.
but at the same time, security anxieties about the immigrants' home countries keep rising, especially when those countries legally demand loyalty in a crisis.
Yeah.
How do democratic nations build a workable, sustainable system of trust with these essential immigrant populations?
That is. Yeah. That's the massive security, economic, and ethical puzzle for the 21st century, isn't it? Japan's dilemma today might be coming to a democracy near you very soon.
It really might. We've tried our best today to lay out the facts and the analysis around these really tense dynamics, the geopolitics, the social changes, without pointing fingers or discriminating against any group.
Yeah.
We just hope you, our listener, take this information and really think for yourself about how complex this evolving world is.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in for this discussion on Asian geopolitics and how immigration gets tangled up in it all.
And hey, if you want more conversations like this, please subscribe to Sip and Talk. Also, check out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife. He's got fun memes, liquor tastings, and his latest European travel vlogs are great. Definitely worth a look.
Sounds fun.
We'll catch you next time on Sip and Talk.
Bye for now.